Welcome to the EADV podcast. In this episode, Dr Sarah Walsh is joined by Professor Dedee Murrell and Professor Aleth Richard for a discussion on gender equity in academic dermatology. Dedee Murrell is Professor and Head of the Dermatology Department at St George Hospital, Sydney at the University of New South Wales. She has been a long-standing advocate and supporter of women in dermatology, joining the Women in Medicine group even as a junior doctor. She has subsequently been on the Women's Dermatology Society Board of Directors and even founded the Australian chapter in 2010. Aleth Richard is Professor of Dermatology at Aix-Marseille University and Head of the Dermatology Department at Hôpital Timon in France. She too has been a long-standing champion of women in dermatology, holding the position of Associate Editor on the editorial board of the Women's Dermatologic Journal and a key member of the Women's Dermatologic Society for many years. But before we start, a reminder for you.
We are excited to announce an open call for papers on digital intelligence for dermatology for a JEDV special issue exploring the world of modern neural networks, big data, and digital technologies transforming dermatology. We welcome clinically oriented submissions including original articles, reviews, systematic reviews, and meta-analysis. Submit your paper by the 31st of May 2024 and visit eadv.org to learn more.
Together, they delve into the legacy of Rose Hirschler, the first female dermatologist, and explore the challenges and progress in achieving gender parity in this field. They share insights from their research and personal experiences, highlighting geographic variations in gender progression. The episode concludes with a discussion on the role of positive discrimination and the need for advocacy to address disparities in private enterprise and academia. We really hope you enjoy this important and insightful conversation. And remember, you can find a link to the articles discussed in the show notes below. Enjoy.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this edition of the EADV podcast. I'm incredibly fortunate today to be joined by two eminent and admirable women who are, great sort of lodestars to me in the world of dermatology. Dedee Murrell, who is the head of the dermatology department at St George's University Hospital in Sydney, with an academic appointment at the University of New South Wales. She is probably best known for her enormous research output in the field of autoimmune blistering dermatoses and as a passionate advocate for forwarding the role of women in dermatology. We're also joined today by Professor Aleth Richard, who is a professor at the University and Teaching Hospitals of Marseille. She's the head of department there at the dermatology unit. And in addition to her expertise in the fields of photobiology and complex medical dermatology, she recently led an enormous piece of epidemiological work, the first of its kind across Europe, culminating in the publication and presentation of the burden of skin disease study, which we brought to the European Parliament last autumn 2023. So welcome to you both, and thank you both for joining us. Now, it's often sort of said that what we achieve in the present day is always building on the work of our forebearers, as Isaac Newton said, standing on the shoulders of giants. And undoubtedly within dermatology, one of these giants was Rose Hirschler, after whom there is now an eponymous award, which Dedee, I know you were honoured with this year at the American Academy. Are you able to tell us a little bit about this trailblazing woman?
I'm able to tell you a little bit about how the Women's Derm Society honoured her. She had passed away long before the Women's Derm Society decided to choose her, because they thought she was the first woman dermatologist in the world, and that's why they named it after her. However, later some research was done by one of the former presidents of the AAD, who in fact found an even earlier lady who was the first dermatologist. So she wasn't somebody that people would know about from a big university hospital. She was somebody whose origins were in Europe, like many of the early dermatologists in New York area of America. And she was a trailblazer for women in dermatology.
Fantastic. Well, congratulations on the award. That's fantastic achievement. So one of the reasons we're here today is to discuss the topic of gender equity in academic dermatology specifically. And the idea for the podcast came from a paper which you, Dedee, and a colleague, Sophie Walter, recently submitted to the JEADV, which is due for publication in the next few months, which set out to look at this topic in a very objective way, taking the emotion out of it. And so I was wondering, Dedee, if you could tell us a little bit about what you set out to measure and the evidence sources that you used.
Yes, thank you, Sarah. In fact, because Aleth Richard, who's here on the podcast with us, was one of those women trailblazers who joined me on the editorial board of the first journal that included only women in the chief editorial seat, the International Journal of Women's Dermatology, started in 2015, we began to look specifically at topics related to the promotion of women, and we had a special issue on this topic. And I was working with Charlotte Gollins, who was a trainee of mine now in England, and we decided to have a look just at how many women editors of different dermatology journals had there been. Were they chief editors? Were they members of the editorial board? And within this special issue, other women and men were looking at different topics. So this article was summarizing some of that research, which had already been peer-reviewed and published, as well as other articles that we found in a diverse group of dermatology literature. So it wasn't all our work, it was summarizing the work of others in this area.
Mm-hmm. And were the results, which in areas showed that women are perhaps lagging behind, were they a surprise to you? Did they bear out your own personal experience as you worked your way through the world of academic dermatology?
I think that overall, the results from the work seem to show that, especially in some Western European countries and in the United States in particular, that women are progressing very much so in academic dermatology. This is our particular focus. And in some countries, such as Asian countries, particularly places like Japan and China, the women are lagging behind a lot. So it's important to point out these deficiencies and ways to go ahead to make it fairer for everybody.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's quite interesting. So there was a geographic variation in your observations, right? Yeah. And Aleth, you were kind enough to provide a critique of the manuscript in the reviewing stage. Would you say that the results resonated with you, that they chimed with your own personal experience of carving out a career in academic dermatology?
Of course, but what I want to highlight is the fact that sometimes motherhood could be a choice of women, and we should take in consideration the fact that not all the women who will be able or are willing to engage into an academic career or a scientific career, because we have to respect us also. That could be a personal choice, and having children and founding a home is something which is also very, how can I say, honorable for the woman by herself. So it should not be a way of stigmatization for some women when they have just this choice. But we should also keep in mind that we should understand that there could have different periods of life in a woman's career. The first one could be, for instance, for the family, for building a house and home, and afterward, when the children are enough, big and self-confident, you can try to go into an academic or a scientific career in a second step. That is now in our society very difficult to make this choice understandable, and it's not the way the society is working. And this is for me a real point. And this should be more taking consideration even for our deans and our university.
Mm-hmm. So guarding against stigmatization, would be very important. Would you have any thoughts on that, Dedee?
I think Aleth is right, because a lot of grants, for example, will say, quote, young investigators only, and then they'll arbitrarily say, oh, under the age of 35 or under the age of 40. But when you take into consideration that a woman may have 10, 12, 15 years of her life devoted to not only giving birth to the children, it's when they are young kids in their education that they really need their mother's input. And this slows down women's output in academics, because they have to give up their evenings, weekends, holidays, if they want to write grants, papers, etc. And so arbitrarily setting these number of years when it comes to women. Now with the Athena program in London, I know that some universities have been really good with that, and that they say a woman can have certain years taken out of the consideration in the timetable based on number of children they've had, etc.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, I would probably observe that even in the absence of children, it's likely that over a woman's lifetime, there will be periods where they perhaps have other caregiving responsibilities, other times when they have to take their focus away from their professional life to place it on their personal life. And I suppose it's to some extent about facilitating those choices and making sure that, as you say, rules that are perhaps put in place arbitrarily and incentives, with regard to childcare and joint parental leave, that all those things are put in place to facilitate women, whatever the choices they decide to make at different points in their professional life. And Dedee, you referred to two concepts in the paper that I hadn't been familiar with, the Matthew effect and the Matilda effect. And I was wondering if you could just give a little summary of those to the listeners, because I find those quite fascinating.
Yes. Can I come to the page itself? Because the Matthew effect was a quote from Matthew in the Bible. And it was a quote that I have here somewhere. Can we pause for a second? So I don't get it wrong. Here it is. So basically, this phrase was coined by someone called Robert Merton in 1968 and takes its name from a passage in the Gospel of Matthew, quote, "For unto everyone that hath been given, he shall have abundance, but from him that hath not been given will have everything that he has taken away." So it's talking about how, for example, men who've been given every chance, the competition fades away during certain periods of their career. And those who've had the opportunities taken away from them by virtue of these rules that we're all faced with, their opportunities then disappear, because by the time they get ready to re-engage with the rules, they're out of contention.
Mm-hmm. So it's almost like if the momentum is with you, the momentum will stay with you and move you on to greater things in your career, which of course is a difficult force to overcome. And the Matilda effect?
Okay, this one was coined in 1993 by a lady called Margaret Rossiter, who was referring to a suffragette called Matilda Joslyn Gage. And it's been witnessed by many female scientists being overlooked in favor of men. And the most famous example we mentioned was that of Rosalind Franklin for the 1962 Nobel Prize, in which Watson and Crick were recognized for discovering the molecular structure of DNA. But her work, which was subsequently being validated, was disregarded.
Mm-hmm. And that was subsequently adapted into a very successful theatrical production in London, that woman's experience. But I thought there were two quite interesting ways of describing concepts to which we can all relate. But what I very much valued in this manuscript, and I'm sure Aleth would agree, was that you didn't just set out what the current state of affairs was, but you set out a roadmap with sort of a 12-point plan to get to where we want to be. And one of the steps in that roadmap was mentorship, which of course is always hugely important to anyone's professional trajectory. And I was wondering if both of you would like to comment on anybody in particular who's had mentorship importance to you and has shaped your career perhaps more than others. Maybe we could start with you, Aleth.
I just have to admit that in the beginning of my career, I have no woman not so many women in France for a specific leadership or a specific mentorship in dermatology or in academic position. But I always have in mind a very, very, very brilliant woman. Her name is Simone Veil. Simone Veil was a survivor from the concentration camp, and she became Minister of Health in France under the government of Jacques Chirac. He was the president of the French Republic, and she fought a lot for the legalization of abortion, and she won, despite all that she had to afford and to affront in front of a lot of people who were not willing to go and to support her. So for me, this woman, who was also a judge, is really a model, and really I pay tribute to all what she gave for women in France.
In difficult circumstances at a difficult time. And I guess you would be really delighted now that recently you had the right to termination of pregnancy enshrined in the Constitution. Am I right?
Exactly.
Yeah, so
I think finalization of what a lot of commitment she has, especially for this part of our life and of what we have to face with as women. Yes.
And Dedee?
For me, when I was a medical student in Oxford, the only specialty that had visible women in it, consultants and higher up the chain, was dermatology. And it was Susan Burge and Fenella Wojnarowska who made a big impression upon me, that they could have husbands, they could have families, and they were having a successful career. And I didn't think of it that way at the time because I was fascinated by dermatology anyway. But I think subconsciously the fact that they were there and they gave you confidence that they could do this made a difference. And then in terms of when I was training in the United States, I was lucky to encounter an amazing woman called Wilma Bergfeld, who was the founding president of the Women's Derm Society. And while I was a resident there, she became the first woman president of the AAD. I think it was 1991. And I had the good fortune to meet her thanks to joining this Women's Dermatology Society. And she's had a huge influence on me, even though we'd never directly worked with each other.
Fantastic. Well, I'm no doubt that both of you are fulfilling that role for many, many, many junior dermatologists now. So one of the things I wanted to ask you a little bit about, also with respect to altering or fixing what we need to in gender equity, is the role for positive discrimination. So do you either of you feel that there is a role for that in trying to achieve gender equity, or is it more about making the rules fair such that they facilitate those choices a bit more easily?
Aleth, you go first.
I think it's both, but in my opinion, one thing which is very important is self-confidence, and the fact that you also offer your confidence and your experience to other people, whatever the gender, the skin color, blah, blah, blah. I think that it's a matter of humanity and empathy, and also the fact that you can offer to young and to the people who are willing to work with you, your experience. And I think the female experience is sometimes a bit more rich than the woman was. I cannot explain it well, but I think we have more feelings because we are mother usually, and that is probably a way we are also working even with our students, with our residents, and also with our colleagues.
So we've got more empathy, perhaps. Yeah,
exactly.
Dedee?
Well, I think that obviously you don't just want to select people because they're a certain gender if they don't have suitable qualifications. When you set a certain minimum qualifications, then there are soft skills, which is why in America they don't necessarily pay attention to what the written reference says. They always make phone calls because they want to know what really this person is like. They usually like the person to have spent some time with the person that they can choose to get into this competitive field. And even with jobs higher up, there's a lot of interviewing, questioning behind the scenes. But where I see things could improve are things such as in pharma industry, they would select experts to be their key opinion leaders. And this is a field where there's not as much equity in terms of who gets selected, who is in these influential positions. And a few of us who've been in this area have been trying to say, well, look, it's not good enough that all the plenary speakers are men, all the chosen people in this particular advisory board are male. So these are areas, I think, within academia and government organizations, it's becoming better. But still within private enterprise that is influencing our specialty, more could be done by having some kind of advocacy for women.
Mm-hmm. So almost, provide the platform and then let them prove themselves. I think I certainly agree with that. And just before we finish up, I just wanted to pick up something you said there, Aleth, about self-confidence. And I think it is quite interesting that perhaps if you leave it till university to start developing skills that relate to public presentation and speaking in public, maybe that is too late. And I was wondering, I wanted to share with you one of my own sort of experiences when I was at school in Ireland. I was at this convent school, all girls. And one of the things that the nuns were absolutely adamant about, and everybody had to do it, was when you turned in the year that was sort of when you were 15, 16, you had to do a whole academic year, which involved public speaking and then debating. And even for the girls who absolutely hated it and did not like speaking in public, it was a mandatory part of the curriculum. And in hindsight, I think that was incredibly enlightened of the nuns to recognize that that was a really essential skill for going out into the world. And I guess I'm wondering, do you feel that we do enough at sort of school level to imbue girls with the confidence, the skills that they need to go forward then and become successful later in life? Maybe I could begin with you, Aleth.
I think that I agree with you that speaking up is an essential element of self-confidence. And at school, something which could be done only to offer theater courses. My daughter, who is now judge, and she has to speak, in a huge audience and sometimes very difficult situation. She had some specific theater courses, and this was very crucial for her career. And I try to propose this in my residence. In France, it's mandatory to have public speaking and oral presentation in front of your mentors, but also in front of all the academics. So that it's mandatory, and we see very well the improvements according to the number of presentation residents have to do during their curriculum. So that's excellent. But sometimes I offer them, especially when I want them to keep going into an academic career, some theater courses and specific training with theater lessons. And that's very good because it's a good tool. And it's not a mandatory, teaching path in France, even in public school and at school. But we should consider it we have lessons about painting or history or things like this. I think it's very important, yes.
Yeah, I think, cultivating the skills is, and I have heard of that being used, actually, theatre skills being used in medical school to teach undergraduates. Dedee, do you have any comments on that?
I think that your school was very forward thinking. I went to a convent school too, and it wasn't part of our curriculum. You could take drama classes if you wanted to, but nothing like this was compulsory. It would have been great to force girls to be better public speakers. And another thing in our article that we came across is even if a woman is very intelligent and all these skills, they're not nurtured in a way to negotiate, because negotiation skills, which debating can give you, is one of the essential skills for not only negotiating for your department, but negotiating for yourself. And this is an area that women do need more assistance with.
Mm-hmm. And as you say, Aleth, I think the culture that we have in dermatology of giving presentations and it being a very important part of the professional development to speak at conferences is fantastic and builds a huge skill set. It's been so wonderful to... Oh, sorry,
even good for a patient, because we have to negotiate every day in our clinical practice,
Absolutely.
So it's another point. We can also train our young, to explain and to give information, and just to have, both decision making with the patient. This is like negotiation too.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, I can't thank you both enough for your time today, and I feel that the future of gender equity in dermatology is in very secure hands with people like you both at the helm. So thank you very much for your time.
We appreciate you joining us, and please make sure you subscribe on Apple Podcasts, follow us on Spotify, or otherwise you can find us on any major podcast provider. If you are a regular listener to our podcast, we would love to hear from you. Your feedback will help us improve the show and develop episodes that you are interested in hearing. To participate in the short survey, simply follow the link in the show notes of this episode. Thank you for your support, it means a lot. We look forward to hearing from you. Until the next episode, take care of your skin.